Hello, world. You're listening to Eleanor Wagner's Strange and Scary World here on the Paranormal UK Radio Network, where we're always creeping it real. I'm your host, Eleanor Wagner.
Please join me in welcoming my guest today, Kimberly Evans. Hi, Kimberly.
Hello, how are you today?
Good. Thank you for joining me on my show. I appreciate your coming.
Happy to be here, and thanks for inviting me.
Sure. Most of the time I have people on here who are sort of experts in certain areas or have experienced something other than the normal paranormal. But I've never really had somebody that's just like you and I, the average person who experiences paranormal and loves to talk about it. And you and I had connected, and you said you've had some things happen to you over the years, out of state though, not in New Jersey. And right. I would love to hear about that.
Yeah. I think what I'd like to just clarify is that sometimes I think if we're open to it, at least I know that that's the case. If I'm sensing something and I just try to be open to it and not try to judge it or not try to pick it apart, my experiences probably started 20 years ago. And I am not a person who actually sees anything, although I have talked with a lot of people in my career in law enforcement and in some of my other jobs who actually have seen visions or see through people. My experience has been just kind of an energy that can either be male or female, or a very negative energy or a very positive energy. Unfortunately, I haven't had very many that have been negative. So sometimes I think if I go into a building that is circa, like here in New Jersey, my goodness, there's just so many amazing structures that are circa 1790, 1802. And I have to be careful because I think, am I pretending like, it's kind of like we want to project out and say, come on, and instead of just being very calm and neutral around the opportunity, in other words. So I wrote down, I have about 12 different things that I wrote down that I thought were really interesting. And some of the most recent ones happened in Nevada, in the Carson City area. And I was working in the legislature for a senator in January last year at this time. And there was a senator who had passed away, very successful, very prestigious, sort of hung out in the circles of the Ronald Reagan era. And he, every session, which in Nevada is every other year, he comes back. And I had heard stories about it. So I thought, oh, that's really cool that this gentleman is coming back every session just to check on us. So one morning I came in, and my senator, who was not in yet, and the folks from the catering department come and bring the breakfast for the senator. And so I walked in and heard a bag rattling, because they're in like paper bags, like a donut or whatever. And I thought he was in his office. So I said, Senator, and this bag kept rattling. And I walk in, and the bag is rattling all by itself. And so I thought, oh, that I wonder if that's Bill Raggio, the late Senator Raggio. And I had been reading a book that was written by one of my colleagues about Mr. Raggio. And I had the book open on my desk. And so I don't know if that was a conduit for him to come in and just kind of say hi to me. And then later I noticed that, and in conversations with some of my colleagues, that it was very common for him to do things like that, kind of mischievous. There was, during his time there was a person, I don't know if it was a woman or a man, that he didn't like very much. And so one of my colleagues said, oh yeah, I was standing by this person's office and the nameplate was there. I looked up at the nameplate and all of a sudden it just whizzed by and flew on the ground.
Well, he sure didn't like that person.
Yeah. And then the only final thing with that story is that this same person, my colleague, I told him what had happened about the lunch bag. And he said, oh yeah, yesterday I'm there bright and early, and the electronics are starting to kind of bing or ping, which is normal. You get your pings on your emails.
Sure.
Well, all of a sudden the copier started going. There's nobody in the office. It's 5 a.m. and the copier is spitting out nothing. It's just spitting out print, and nobody touched anything. And he just assumed that it was the senator. So, and I've noticed that that electronics are a way that I think folks, or whoever they are, energies, like to communicate. I worked for an advertising agency in Reno that was in a mansion with the columns like you see, Terra's, the big columns. And we had editing bays. And in those days, we did a lot of our own in-house production. And Catherine was her name. Her name was Catherine Mackey. And she had died in the house. And she was the wife of a very prominent miner, or came and made his fortune in silver and gold. And so she had died there, and I knew that. And then she came to me all the time, but she was always fiddling around with the electronics, and I could always feel her. I always felt she was so warm and loving, and I could kind of see something in the peripheral of that was the only time I could sense, because she was one that would come behind me. And I was always looking around. It's like, oh, that's Catherine. So when I left, I was very sad, because it sounds really weird, but I developed a relationship with her that was very, very loving, right? So I got my box, I'm walking out and to my car, and the owner of the ad agency it was around Halloween, and she had put like leaves around all these big columns. There were like 5 columns. And so when I'm walking out to my car, I could feel Catherine behind me. And so I turned around. It gives me chills when I talk about it. When I turned around, I said, goodbye, Catherine.
Aww,
to myself. Yeah. I didn't say it out loud. And on one of the columns, those leaves were flipping back and forth.
She was saying goodbye.
It was a dead calm day. And just the one she was waving goodbye. So, and then the only other thing about that house and her was that my ex-husband is a retired detective for Reno PD. And there were calls, and he had a canine that he worked with. And there were calls to that house all the time because it was an art museum. And so it was high security, millions of dollars worth of paintings and artifacts. And Catherine would flip the lights on and then trip the alarms. And
the alarm.
Yeah.
I've heard that often. I've heard a lot of places get fined every time the alarms go off, or the cops have to go to places that get triggered. And the people say to them, nobody was there to trigger it. Right. It's not like it's our fault. It's haunted. So if it's haunted, you can't blame us the fact that the alarms are getting triggered. And I'm so like,
my husband ex-husband was a rookie, so he didn't know. So he was like going to go in and take care of business, right? Bring the dog in. And his friends said that. They said, his partner said, just forget it. It's haunted. And he said, oh, that's ridiculous. He was totally not on board with any of this. So he went in, and King, his canine, was a great big German Shepherd who had saved his life, done all kinds of heroic things. That dog ran. He refused to go in. And so my ex drug him in, saying, you've got to pay attention. You're a trained canine. You got to go in the house. And he absolutely refused. He ran right back to his cop car and jumped in. So, that particular Catherine loved going there, I think. Yeah. So, crazy.
I'm like you, though. I consider myself on the lower part of the spectrum. So many people that are on my paranormal team are more advanced in their gifts than I call it my foofy feeling. Like you, I'll go into a building and I can sense if there's something good or something bad there. I can sense if there's something there. But I just recently talked to a pretty well-renowned medium named Daniel Jackson, and I was actually interviewed by him because he wants to have me on his show. But because he's got his own background in the field, I had said, I would love to have you on mine as well. But we had this really nice telephone conversation, and where you go off on a tangent. I mean, you start talking about your background and your history and what you've done, blah, blah, blah. But then it gets on the personal level. And so he starts telling me stuff about myself, which was very interesting. No. And then he says to me, you're really gifted, right? And I said, really? He said, yeah, but you're waking now at this time in your life. And I'm going, okay, I get that, because it's true. I remember when I was a kid having something serious happen that stifled anything from progressing at that point. And it wasn't until I got older to realize it wasn't my fault, I couldn't have done anything about it, that I started to open myself up to things more and more. But he's absolutely right that I'm just waking now because my kids are full grown and I'm actually focusing on me now. And so I was able to write that book, but get it published, which led to the next book, which led to me becoming a paranormal investigator, which led to me being a podcast host. So I was like, okay, well, I can see where you're coming. He says, no, but I'm also talking more on the spiritual level. He said, if you want to, that empathic side of you can grow. You just have to want it, and you have to tell God, put it out there. I'm ready. And I was like, wow, that's pretty interesting, because I do know that being around people who are so sensitive and putting myself in these situations, such as haunted buildings that we're investigating, is making me learn more and realize how more receptive I am than I thought that I was.
Yeah. So you didn't have any childhood experiences?
Oh, sure I did. Yeah.
I had. Oh, interesting.
Yeah, I had quite a few of them. And I was a kid who was afraid. And then I was having premonitions at one point, and, my mom kind of poo-pooed it off and said, oh, it's just a dream. And I thought most of, the time that what she said was true, until the one time the premonition that I had actually came to fruition and freaked me out, because I thought, I could have done something about it. And, now thinking back, I was was just a child. Of course I couldn't do anything about it. But that's not how I felt at that time. So I kind of stopped at that point, everything. And it wasn't until really when I was 30, when my father died, that I actually, at that point, had gotten to that point in my life where I realized there was nothing I could have done with it back then. Don't be afraid, blah, blah, blah. And then the day my father died, when he came to me, it was a huge awakening for me. It was a really impactful event in my life that he came to me when he died. And from that point on, it's just gotten stronger and stronger. But like I said, it wasn't until I was 50 and I had published that first book that things really started to take off for me. And now that I'm around like-minded people, more sensitive people, and I'm putting myself into those positions, that I'm able to actually build up on whatever it was that I had back then that I didn't allow to happen all those years ago.
Not pushing it away or being frightened about.
Right. And it's true that everybody is sensitive to a certain extent. We all have that ability. It's what we do with our mind and how we accept it or reject it that allows us to move forward. I've found from all of my research now, too, especially speaking to so many people and interviewing them for the books, that people who are nurtured in their gifts are much more advanced over time than someone like myself, who my mom said, oh, it was just a dream. I'm not blaming her for it. That's how she handled it. But that's the way I was brought up. But now when I speak to people whose families embraced it or knew it was in their history and thrived on it, you see how far they've come at this point in their lives compared to myself.
And I think, I went along with some investigators in the Carson City area. And, I think there's a lot of money to be made in the business, and it's not necessarily the real thing. I've noticed, been on some ghost walks in other places, and it's a little, I don't know, it's highly polished, and which is fine. But I didn't know anything about the instruments and the recording devices. And so I took a tour with a group, and they're out of Virginia City, Nevada, called the Empathic Paranormal Team. And so they brought all of their equipment, and we went to Dayton, Nevada, which is about 15 miles from Carson. And it's just filled with energy. And so there's an old jail that's circa 1865, right in the Civil War time. And we went in there. There was some stuff going on in some of the other beautiful old buildings, but this was the most impactful for me. It was a jail, and they were able to connect with a man who had been in the jail for murder. And it was a tiny little, it was so dark and so oppressive, and the energy that I felt. And there were several of us lay people sort of there. And I thought, oh my gosh, this is just so, I just felt like crying. It was so sad. And so they were able to connect with this guy, and they also brought back the little girl who he had murdered.
Oh.
And she was talking, and I don't remember if she forgave him. I can't remember the sequence of events, but they were able to mostly talk with him. And then we were inside the jail, and they had old shackles from the time period. There was nothing manufactured. It wasn't a museum, or it was just this old jail that had been preserved. So the shackles were there, and they set up all their equipment, and they wanted to make sure, and my stepdaughter was with me, and she goes, Kimmy, we've got to tape this. And I said, what? She goes, look. And the shackles, while they were talking and communicating with the guy, the murderer, the shackles started to move. I looked at them, and I thought, isn't that interesting? And so a couple of the investigators got down and were able to determine that there was no breeze, there wasn't something that was vibrating to make them move. They determined that that was how he was angry or whatever he was, that those shackles were moving. So that's kind of what I've noticed. Another time, years ago, my mother and I were in Savannah, Georgia, and we were Charleston. And that's a seacoast place, right? Charleston, South Carolina. And we were on some water, and we were in an old tavern, and a couple that had just gotten married were next to us, and we were all enjoying our breakfast. And I looked over, and a glass, and again, I'm just kind of like, what in the world is happening? This glass immediately whisks off the table and smashes down on the thing. Well, the young couple, she looked at him and said, I think we need to leave. And he said, yeah, we're going to go. So they left their breakfast, threw down some money, and left. So the waitress, this old kind of grandma waitress, came over, and I said, does this happen a lot here? She said, oh yeah, it's Captain Tony. Or she said, he doesn't like, for some reason, he doesn't like young couples. And so he does that frequently. It scares, and these are tourists mostly,
Sure.
So just little things like that I don't know if I am a conduit or I'm just lucky to be there. I just don't really know.
It sounds like you're sensitive to spirit, and
Okay.
you just, you haven't done anything with it, but you are sensitive and you can feel and see when things like that happen. And they know that. They're attracted to that. Spirit is attracted to people who they know are sensitive and will come around and try and get our attention.
Okay. Another incident happened. This was probably in the early 90s, and my mother, and she loved it. I mean, she didn't experience anything, but she loved my stories, and she loved to hang out. Like, we went to, just to backtrack, we went to the ad agency one time on a Sunday, and she said, I want to see where you work, because she said, oh, I know it looks like Terra. She loved Gone with the Wind. I want to see the mansion. I said, okay. So we go, have my key in the door, and there's a huge crash, a terrific crash. There's nobody. It's an early morning on a Sunday. There's nobody there. Like, there's no gardeners. There's no production people. It's nothing. It's just she and I. And I knew in my heart that it was Catherine telling me, you're not coming in today. You're not coming in. So I said, Mother, I don't think Catherine wants us to come. She said, are you sure? I said, I promise. We'll come back a different day. But I'm not kidding. Catherine was not having us there. She just, and I
maybe she was a little jealous of your mom.
And maybe I never thought of that. Yeah.
Yeah, she knew that she was your mom, and you had that close connection with her. Maybe that's what it was.
Yeah, that's crazy. And I don't recall if the next day or if there was something that had been turned over, but she did something to turn something over to make a crash, So
right.
Anyway, my mother takes my family and all her grandchildren, my nieces, to the coast in Oregon. And it's an old, half of the home is old. The other half has been renovated or added onto. It's on the Oregon coast, probably in the Florence area. And so we all go to bed. The kids are playing around. Everybody's asleep. And I'm in the old wing, and I feel terrible pressure on my chest. And it's a male energy, and he's really angry. And it was like I couldn't catch my breath, and I'm in between a dream state. And I kept saying, you need to go. You need to go. He wasn't going because this was his spot. This was his home. And so I literally got up with my blankets and went in the new wing. And I was fine. I slept. So the second night, my brother, who is not at all, does not believe in any of this. In fact, doesn't like me to talk about it because it makes him feel bad or whatever. He said, Kim, he said, whoever this guy is was up last night. I said, what do you mean? And he said, I had to get up to go to use the bathroom. And I woke up and I heard a whooshing noise. And he was in the new wing. He wasn't in the old wing. He heard a whooshing noise and the words with a male voice, Auntie Kim, that's me. And he got so freaked out, he never went to the bathroom. He just went back to his wife, hid under the covers. And then the next morning, the little kids, and they were probably second, third grade, they're all grown now. They said, yeah, Auntie Kim, we couldn't watch our VHS tapes because they kept rewinding. So he was fiddling around with whatever electronics there. So my mother, long story short, my mother says, well, let's come back. This is such a lovely place. And all of us said, absolutely not. this guy is not having they're not having kind of thing. So
that's why equipment is so good, because you say they mess with the electrical, but to have equipment in general, I mean, even just using a regular flashlight is very productive when you're working with spirit, because if they want to interact with you, they'll mess with that flashlight for you. But we usually use K2s and pendulums and dowsing rods to get like yes and no responses, and I find them very effective. I don't need really any of this newfound technology that they've got coming out. At least it doesn't appeal to me at this point in time. I'm fine using the traditional methods of, like, say, plain old flashlight and the K2s and the pendulums, because they're just as effective. But I do know exactly what you mean when you say how a lot of these paranormal tours and shows and stuff can be the tours are very touristy, and then the paranormal shows can be very deceiving when you're watching them, because if you actually go on an investigation, they don't really happen like they show you on those shows. I mean, I'll go to a building and we can be there for 6 hours and nothing will happen. You just can't make it happen, and you have to remember that shows and those tours are really for entertainment purposes. If you legitimately want an investigation, you're going to have to go to one that's for real and not something that's broadcast on television.
Right. And you have to be very patient. And I knew that with the empathic folks that I was with. We went into another building and they did the same thing. They were able to capture yes, no with, I forget what kind of an instrument. Sounds like a lot like what you're describing. And the guy that was a male energy that was in the museum, like this little schoolhouse that they had turned into like a little museum. And he was playing with them. He was joking with them. And every question that they asked was no. No. He was like kind of poking at him, which I
Right.
thought was really interesting, you know.
Sure. Because
yeah.
you know how many times he's probably been asked questions over and over and over again?
Yeah.
Over the
and
years.
The other thing, my mother passed away when you talk about your parents, and she had always said that her grandmother used to come and sit on her bed right after she died. And that was kind of a family thing, was that that people like to sit and the bed would go down. You know, her sister said, yeah, mother came and sat on my bed and she actually got into bed with me and held my hand. And I had to tell her to go. You know, I had to tell her to go. So I thought about that. And I moved here to northern New Jersey. And my mother had a beautiful mantel clock that I have been schlepping from East Coast to all my moves. It's never worked, right? The last time it chimed was 1982. And she said, Kim, I want this clock to work. This is back in the 80s. So will you take it to a clock repair guy? And I said, okay. So the guy said, this thing you can't repair it for whatever reason. And he was, you know, a professional clock person. So I said, Mother, I'm sorry, but it's so pretty. Let's just have it. She goes, yeah, I'll just put it on the mantle. So she passes away in 2017. I take this clock, have the clock in my bedroom here. And when I move in this June of last year. And I don't know if it was synced up to the reason why she started making it work, but all of a sudden I hear the clock ticking. It hasn't ticked since 1982. It starts ticking and it starts chiming like it's supposed to. It starts
nice.
It had never been to the clock doctor, right? And I know it was her. And I got such
your mama did it.
Yeah, overwhelming sense of love, and it was her, and she stayed for a whole day. And so that clock chimed for, you know, at least as long as I was up, and then she went away, she left, and it stopped.
Oh, Dad.
I was sad, but I was still actually very happy that she used it as a way to sort of let
you know that she was with you. Yeah, I love those poignant stories. They're so great. Love it.
Yeah. So
that's wonderful. Too bad she couldn't keep it working though. That would have been nice.
For sure. You see. Oh, and the other one. Is it okay if I just kind of tell you about some of this stuff?
Sure. I love hearing these stories. Okay. Absolutely.
So let's see. I went in the early 2000s. I worked in law enforcement as a public affairs officer. So my job was, the Nevada Department of Public Safety was a huge law enforcement shop. So there are lots of divisions, and one of the divisions was emergency management. So I went to, which was kind of a FEMA related, and like criminal justice assistance. And so we all went to Emmitsburg, and Emmitsburg, isn't that awful? I don't remember the state, but it was in an old convent. So the training that we took for public affairs officers was in this convent. And so I was just so enamored. It was just like the most beautiful building in brick. And so we stayed in these dorms, and I felt like there was a male energy in there, and it kind of scared me. And I thought, you know, I don't know what to do. This is kind of his territory. So it was just a very little thing, but I usually get up in the middle of the night to use the restroom, and I went, came back to bed, and then felt like, I'm going to get up again. I'm just going to get up and get a glass of water. I went into the bathroom, and the toilet seat was up. So he had pulled it up. Like, you know what? You're not. So it was, and then we were so, you know, I think if you're really busy and your boss is there and you're in a work base, I was not able to really tune in, but that was his way, I know, of saying, hurry on, you know, get out of here kind of thing. Because he didn't feel like he was very happy to see that I was there now. So
well, I like the fact that you respect the fact that it's their territory, that you've gone into their space. Because a lot of people like to say, well, it's my house now, but try telling that to the spirit who's still there, and they're thinking the total opposite. I mean, they really have to learn to respect the fact that you're in their space, and then try and come to a comparable agreement with that spirit if that spirit doesn't want to move on. And it is what it is. And some people are very adamant about getting rid of what's in there. And I don't like that. I like it when...
I listened to I think it might have been one of your podcasts where you talked about a home that you guys tried to go in to encourage the spirits to leave, and they would not leave. And then the people, didn't they end up just abandoning the house because it was pretty bad? Or was it maybe somebody else that you were involved?
I'm not sure. It doesn't.
Okay.
I'm trying to remember.
Yeah, a home that basically was so haunted, and you or maybe your investigators tried to do a little bit of not an exorcism, but something to encourage that person to leave, and he or she was not leaving. And the people were so upset that they just decided to opt out of the purchase of the home or the rental or whatever. I don't know.
Well, you know what? That may have been something that came up in a discussion with team member Laurel Devine. That would have been my very first episode. And in that particular one, it was a little different than the way you're explaining it. She was a rentor, and she had a building that she was renting out. And no matter how often they rented it out the people never stayed in there for more than 6 months.
That's it.
And she was extremely sensitive, and she knew that it was haunted, but she didn't realize it was going to cause this kind of a problem. And she needed to go in there and figure out who was this spirit and why were they behaving that way. And she and her husband both had gone in on separate occasions to say, dude, do you realize what you're doing? I mean, I know it's your house, but please, can you live in peace with these people? I mean, we need the money. We bought this as an investment and we rent it out. That we fixed it up beautiful. We hoped that you would like it. Why are you giving these people a hard time? But that spirit was a really angry and mean spirit, actually, and began hurting the people that were in the building. And it was no wonder that people weren't lasting more than 6 months. I mean, it got to the point where in one situation, the couple that was living in there, the man, who was always a docile, calm, friendly, loving man, ended up getting into a fight with somebody out on the front porch and ended up killing him. And then when they left, a woman came in with lived there with her young son. I think he was probably, off the top of my head, I want to say he was like 5 years old, which, when you put a 5-year-old in a bathtub, they're fine. It's not like they're 3 and 2 and you got to be there watching that they don't fall under the water. She left for a minute to go down the hall to get towels, and when she came back, he was dead, drowned in the bathtub, and insists that something killed her son in that home. So that was kind of the last straw for Laurel and her husband. They decided, we need to not let people live in this house anymore and let it go into foreclosure. And that's what they ended up doing. And they ended up telling the bank, you need to let people know, because you're going to try and sell this house to somebody else. You need to let people know that this house is haunted. And they laughed at her, thinking she must be out of her mind. But there were so many things that had happened. The realtor knew it was haunted. There's a huge story in my Warren County Hauntings book, actually, her story about that building. And so it went into foreclosure, and it was empty for, I think it was like 2 years, she said. And one day she said, I'm just going to drive over there because it looks like there's somebody else. I'm going to knock on the door and ask them if they're experiencing anything. And sure enough, when she knocked on the door, the woman said, oh, we're going to be out of here in a week. And the teenage children that were with her in the background going, this house is possessed. They were yelling at her at the door. So it's still there, but it is an angry man. That's who it is. And we actually have a photograph that when she took a picture of the house, you can see the shadow of a man with his arm upraised, like wanting to hit. But this was also in the stories from the people that were living there. They felt like they were being taunted. They felt like somebody wanted to hit them and beat them with a pipe or a pole or a bat. And this is what this thing looked like in the window of the picture. Yeah. So, and I have that picture in the book, and I have them on my website as well, because my books I like to say they're about the landscape of the life and the spirits that live there. So I have a lot of history about the towns that I write about. And if I have the history of the building, I like to share that too. And then I usually have the accounts that people share with me that I write about. And then if my team gets in there for an investigation, then that ultimately ends up being an addition to the chapter, because I can share what happened when the team was in there. And so I like to put these pictures on the website with a whole bunch of more, and the audios and the videos if we have them, because people like to watch them and listen to them. And those are legit findings. It's not something that is fabricated for entertainment purposes. It's actually what we uncovered, or the people who lived there sent to me. Let's just say now I get a lot of people emailing me and saying, here, I've sent you a video. This is what we got on our camera. Can you tell me if it's paranormal or not? And then I look at it. I have some people on my team look at it, and we decide whether we think it is. And then I'll tell them of our findings. And if it's paranormal, most of the time they'll say, can you come and do an investigation? And it ends up being something that we go to. So
do the people ask you about not only maybe the backs, if you do some research about the entity or the energy or the person who had passed, is there a sense of why, or an explanation about someone like that really angry man who is stuck? Are they stuck here? What is the reason that they're not? Like, my mother came to me to tell me, good job. You left a very bad marriage. You're here in New Jersey. I know that's why she was here, to kind of give me, this hug through the clock. And then she left. So those that are not doing that, what is your sense? Well,
here's my take on all of that. The situation with your mom is entirely different from a ghost that's left behind. Your mom has already crossed over, and she can come back anytime she wants to visit you and your loved ones, because she just wants to check on you, let you know that she's okay, or be there for your birthday, whatever that may be. They can come and go as they please. But a ghost who's earthbound, they're here because they have unfinished business, they are attached to something here, or that they don't even know they're dead. That's usually, in my opinion, and what I've found from my research, why they're here. And most of the time, there's somebody who doesn't know they're dead. It's usually a child or a tragic death. Those are the ones that it just happened suddenly and they didn't even know, and then they missed the light. Somebody who is angry and mean can sometimes tend to be unfinished business or an attachment to their wealth or whatever that may be. If somebody's loving in life, they could be loving in death. That's their personality. It doesn't go away when they die. So if they were a mean and nasty person, then they're going to be a mean and nasty person in death in that home. And that guy, I don't know if she ever found out who he was. I don't know, for some reason in my head, it rings that there was a bar there and an old man owned it. I don't know. I could be getting it mixed with another story because it's been so long. But if somebody's mean and nasty in life, they're going to be mean and nasty in death. And if they're very protective of what's theirs, this being did not want anyone in that house. He did not want anyone there. And he was willing to hurt them to get them out, which was really scary. I mean, we had another investigation at one point too that the spirit was nasty. And I already knew what the residents in that home over the years had experienced. And when we go in for an investigation, I don't tell my team members anything because, one, they don't want to know. And two, it also is a great way to affirm something. If they say something that they see or hear or feel that I already know about, I can say, yes, that's exactly what's happened. So this way, the homeowner can see we're not full of shit and we can be proving to ourselves that this has really actually happened. And I like that because to me, then it comes full circle. So at that particular home, I already knew what the residents were feeling and happening over the years, but none of my team members did. So when they came in, I can tell you that the family had felt that something was trying to throw them down the stairs. The children didn't want to go into the basement. They said that there was a man down there that was going to beat them up. So these were things that I already knew. And when the team members came in, that's exactly what happened. One of the team members felt like somebody was trying to throw him down the stairs. Oh. And the other medium saw a man beating the shit out of another person in the basement. So it just kind of confirmed all those things that the family had said. So the woman now was fixing the home up to rent it out. And probably the weekend after we were there, a couple was going to move in with their 5-year-old. And she didn't want to have them move in there with this thing in there because she was really afraid that it was going to hurt the child. So we had one of my team members go in and do a house cleanse. And then she locked the house for her too, which means that you lock the spirit out and it's not able to get back in there. But I often wonder, because those houses in that area, the whole area in Washington, New Jersey is very palpable. It's just full of energy. And those houses, one looks like the next. It's kind of like track houses. They're built just like a bi-level. They build a bi-level. They're all the same. And this is kind of like what it is in certain areas in Washington too. They built one style home and then they built a whole slew of them in this neighborhood. I often wonder if that spirit entered another home after it was locked out of that one. I'm always curious because now people are reading my books more frequently. And so I'm getting known, I guess you could say, for writing those books. So people are coming out of the woodwork and saying, oh, you wrote a story about this location. I used to live there, or this and that. So I'm waiting for the person to come with me about that location and say, I'm not talking about that location, but I live next door. And, I'm just waiting for that day for that to happen because it wouldn't surprise me that happened if it was forced out of one building to go into another,
The tragic death thing has happened twice in my family. A drowning, this was in the late 70s, early 80s. He died tragically, my stepsister's husband, and he came to a family member and asked what happened. No. And then on the East Coast, my sister-in-law here, my brother's best friend, died tragically on an operating table. It was just a very simple angioplasty, and the doctor slipped and killed him. And he didn't know either. So he came to my sister-in-law. It was as if, in both instances, it was as if he was real. And he just sat down. He walked in the door and sat down. And both of my sister-in-law and my stepsisters, anyway, the relative, they were really cool. And they weren't frightened. And they just said, this is what happened. And then they left. So it's like they needed to know. And then they went on, perhaps.
So that they could move on. We had something happen to us not too long ago. We were actually doing an investigation in a local antique shop because they were very active and they had a lot of spirits. And somebody had been there not too long before to get rid of the spirits that were in there, but there were a few that stayed behind and they wanted to kind of say, can we find out who they are and do they want to go to the light? So we went there to do this investigation. And it had been not too long after there was an accident in New Jersey where somebody died and a young man died in a tragic death, a farming accident. And we're in the middle of doing this investigation, trying to find out who these spirits were and interacting with them when all of a sudden we get this spirit of a young man. And so I had mediums with me too that could actually see who was there. So I knew what this young man had looked like from pictures in the paper, and she hadn't heard anything about any of this. So I was the one that actually caught on to who he was and why he was there, because Laurel was just kind of like, I see this young man and he's really confused and he's worried about his girlfriend. And I see in my head as she's describing what this young man looks like, and I'm going, oh my goodness, I wonder if it is, I can't remember his name. I mean, I can't remember. Let's say his name was John. I wonder if that's John. And so it was all kind of coming to me from what the women there that were mediums that were saying, and the information they were getting was kind of putting two and two together, that I think this is who he is.
Right.
And so when I just blurted it out, are you John? And I said the last name, and we found out that that's who he was. And he did not know that he was dead.
Really?
He didn't know. He like your brother-in-law did not know what happened, and he was scared. He was a young kid who was scared because he just didn't know what was going on. Where was his girlfriend? Was she okay? And so
Did he leave?
we had to. He did. We ultimately, we were very, very. We were all. I mean, we were all women, and you know how women are sensitive, and we were bawling our eyes out. We were all crying. We just felt like that motherly instinct kick in. Like we were just so heartbroken for this young man, and we were in that position to have to tell him, unfortunately, what had transpired, and that his family was okay and everyone was okay, and that he could move on to the light. That it was really sad that it happened to him, but that he could move on freely and comfortably, knowing that everybody left behind would be fine. But I'll tell you, it was very emotionally draining to realize that this is what was happening. We were just there for an ordinary investigation, and to have this unfold. I mean, I feel grateful for the fact that we were there, because where this young man had passed was not near to where this investigation was. So the way the other women were explaining to me, he'd probably been wandering around trying to find somebody who could hear him.
Oh my goodness.
And we just
had trying too. My goodness.
Yeah, so we just happened to be there doing this investigation, and he knew that he saw that we were talking to the other spirits and knew that we could connect with him. And so we did. We were able to explain to him what had happened. So I was grateful for the fact that we were there to help him, but it was very emotionally draining, I'll tell you. But everybody can rest in the fact that he's in a better place. And so.
The law enforcement community, of course, are not, other than on the down low saying, like with the adage, oh, it's haunted, but that was not. But I made friends with a guy who was the chief of the Capitol Police. And so before he had become chief, he would do the midnight shift, and he would sit at the desk and at the Capitol in Nevada. So, the Capitol's became a state during Lincoln's time. So it's 1850, 1865, during the Civil War. And so I asked him a couple times, have you noticed any kind of, because I did marketing and, I did the newsletter. In those days, it was a hard copy newsletter, and we did a ghost story kind of thing. And he said, oh, no. And then the more I became familiar with him and we kind of became friends, he said, well, don't use my name, but I want to tell you kind of what's been going on. And I said, okay. And he said, there is a governor, and in the Capitol in Nevada, not unlike some other capitals, is that all of the governors from the very beginning have their portraits done, and they're all around the Capitol building. And one of the governors, on his birthday, every single year since this gentleman, the chief, had been
passed away.
Serving, every single year at midnight or between midnight to 2 a.m., his picture would fall off the wall. And there's enough provenance or enough history, obviously, about Governor Nevada, but it was always on his birthday. And I said, well, that's real. I wonder what the deal is with that. And he said, don't ask me. I just observed it. And I said, well, is there anything else? He says, well, I'll deny it if anybody asks. He's kind of old codger. He worked for Chicago PD, so he's like the kind of old retired codger. I said, what? He said, many, many times I've seen a woman and I see through her, and she comes down the stairs. That's where I see her, is on the stairs coming down to my station at the entrance of the Capitol. And she's in a big hoop skirt. And she's a young, beautiful woman, but I can see through her, and she always smiles at me, and then she vanishes. And I said, well, how did you feel about that? And he just said, I don't know. I just kind of looked forward to seeing her. But then she stopped coming. So that was, I thought, I don't know if there was a connection between the governor who kept falling off the wall and this woman. I mean, I don't know. But, stories like that are just,
because possibly they were just two separate spirits in the same building. But he's definitely the perfect example of somebody who's sensitive. He's in denial. He doesn't want anything to do with it.
Yeah, for sure, yeah. And, lots of ghost stories in Nevada. And, Fort Churchill was a fort that was built during the Civil War. And my ex was working in the Park Service, and they stayed overnight. And again, these are future cops. And so he told me, didn't tell anybody else, but he said, no, there were horses. He could see through them. And they were Nevada. I don't know what kind of outfits they had on, but there were horses, and they were running through the ruins of Fort Churchill. You could walk through the ruins. Talk about energy. Oh my gosh. It's just, I get goosebumps now, but I thought, wow, that was interesting that
You're saying that he could see the actual horses running through now that's called residual energy. That's something that Gettysburg experiences on a regular basis. It's just history of tragic death or a tragic episode or event that took place, and it's just playing. And well, it's not necessarily just tragic either. It's just they call it residual energy, and it just happens over and over and over again. Because I've heard of residual energy that's happened. That's not because there was a tragic energy. It was a meeting place in the 1800s where they had all these meetings all the time, and you can oftentimes hear the men in garbled voices having their meeting. It just is. It's residual energy. And that sounds like
that was. Yeah. And I was able to go when I went to Emmitsburg and experienced the guy with the toilet seat. I did go to Gettysburg, and I didn't necessarily want to go because I didn't really care about the military stuff. I was so grateful that I was able to go. We did get a tour and talk about you refer to it as the darkness, the pain, the sadness of Gettysburg was overwhelming. And I think we all felt it just because of the sight of such tragedy, but I was completely overwhelmed with I want to cry. And another time in Virginia City, there was prostitution is legal. And so they like to not glorify it, but they collected a lot of artifacts and things and stories about women in Virginia City who did that during the silver and gold rush, primarily the silver time mining. And there is a museum that's in a brothel, an old brothel, and you walk down the stairs, and it was so overwhelming. I couldn't stay down there because the energy was so dark, and I can't even hardly explain it. It's women who have just been completely persecuted and selling their bodies. And I told my ex, I said, I can't stay. I got to go. So sometimes it's just saturated, right? With
absolutely. And a similar example to what you've just described. We did an investigation in the old Sussex Inn in Sussex, New Jersey, that is now called the American Tavern, which back in the day was called Deckertown Commons, I believe it was, off the top of my head. But it is a 4-story building, and the main floor is very active, as the whole building is. But the main floor it's a lot of fun spirits. I mean, there's horses in there because it used to be the stable, and the spirits that you sense there are fun. But when you go to the upper floors, it's that feeling that you just described, that dark, negative. And that's because the upper floors have been home to numerous murders, numerous overdoses, suicides. The element that's lived in there over the years has been very negative. And so the team members that went up there that were sensitive like you had to leave. They couldn't stay. They were, I got to get out of here. I can't stay here. Yeah. That's how
even the investigators. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Well, they're just ordinary people like you and I. So they can only take a certain amount of energy too. And if it's bad like that, and if it weighs on them like that, they just want out.
I know that if I were a little bit better about opening myself up, and also I'm retired now, and I think I'm just trying to decide what I want to do with the rest of my life. I'm newly divorced. And so if you're kind of pinging around, ricocheting around, you're not in a spot. But I do know that there's so much activity happening in northern New Jersey. And I went to in Sussex, there's a little playhouse. I went to a little community theater that's in the Sussex area. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Crazy.
Right. That's actually a chapter in my book. I wrote about that in the last, the Sussex County Hauntings Part 2. Really? The theater is in one of the chapters in the book. Yeah. Actually, I've been trying to get us in there for an investigation. A woman at the barber across the street said, I know the owner, I'll give you his name, and he would love to have you. And I've called several times and he's not returned my calls. So I don't know if it's COVID that's keeping him away. I don't really know, but I'll end up trying again eventually. But I would love to have you come on an investigation, see if it's something you might enjoy.
Yeah, I've only done the one just as an observer, and I was fascinated by it. So yes, thank you. I would love to come.
Sure. You have to start somewhere, right?
I know. Well, Eleanor, I appreciate your time very much. It's just been a pleasure.
Well, thank you. And thank you so much for sharing your stories with me and my listening audience. I'm sure they're going to get a thrill out of hearing what you've told me.
All right. Well, thanks again. And then we'll just stay in touch.
Absolutely.
Ghostly listeners, you can follow me on my website, authoreleanorwagner.com. where there are links to my books and video updates and photographs from all the Lady Ghostbuster investigations. Also, you can sign up or level up on my author Eleanor Wagner Patreon program. That's Patreon, where you will find special bonus opportunities only available to its patrons, such as one-on-ones with me and co-hosting opportunities on episodes of Eleanor Wagner's Strange and Scary World podcast. Thank you, paranormal enthusiasts, for tuning in today. I hope you'll come back again. Remember to tap into your own gifts. Everyone has them. And in the meantime, make sure you're creeping it real.